Hello and welcome to Reboot. This is City of Sydney event series. I'm Rebekah Campbell from Zambesi.com and I'll be facilitating today. So first of all, before we start, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people, the traditional owners of the land in which most of us are meeting on today, and their elders past and present. Also, because we're all online and we're in different places, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which all of us are meeting on, and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are attending the event today. So today is the second of a series of 18 really incredible free business workshops brought to you by the City of Sydney. In a moment, I'm going to introduce Tim Doyle for a masterclass in digital marketing in the era of COVID. So for those of you who aren't aware of what the Reboot series is about, so recently the City of Sydney put out a business needs survey to ask our business community what you need right now. And you told us on that series, on that survey, that you wanted to learn more about digital marketing, e-commerce, business strategy and finance, particularly with a lens of recovery and growth in 2021. So today is the second of a series of events. I'm just going to go into a series of 6 events, I'm going to go into the structure of how the event's going to work today. So we're going to introduce Tim Doyle in a minute. So Tim is the founder of Pilot and Kin, and also one of the founding team members of Koala. And he'll be giving a masterclass in digital marketing strategy in the era of COVID. We've then, for these events, we are bringing in members of the community. So we have 3 case studies that we'll be bringing in. So Chris from a business called The Whiskey List, Nina from a business called Courtesy of the Artist, a jewellery retailer in the Sydney Strand Arcade, and also has a gallery and now an online presence as well. And also Andy and Sean from Cooey Snacks. So they'll be sharing what their challenges are in this time, and I hope that many of you will be able to recognise yourselves in these businesses. So when we set up the event today, we asked many of you what you'd like to get out of it. And I'm going to share, a few of you reached out to me individually and shared some of the things that you would like to get, a few of you in our community. So Jody from Gem Events in the Hills District wants to learn how to zone in on her core audience in her marketing. Her core audience is business owners and PR agency. Ian in Ultimo, who has a new business in stealth mode, who is looking to launch soon, wants to hear from Tim about launching new products and launching a business at this time. Carmel, who has Carmel Katanutu Psychotherapy in Newtown and St George, wants to get better at driving customers to her website and also email capturing. Angela Finn, who works at Child Fund Australia and also is a marriage celebrant business in Coogee. She's interested in setting up a YouTube channel and a podcast and wants to learn about how to use YouTube and podcast to drive growth. And Fiona Thornton, who is a founder and director of Note Consulting and also on the board of the Australian Ballet. The Australian Ballet is looking to set up an online store, and she's interested in learning how to grow the Australian Ballet's online presence and how to drive membership and merchandise sales. So that is just some of what we're going to look at today. We also had many questions from you in the pre-event survey, and we're going to try and get to as much of that as we can. So first, I'm going to introduce Tim. Tim is going to give us a 20-minute download masterclass, and then we'll come to the case studies. So Tim, I'm just going to hand to you to share your insights. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Rebekah. I'm just going to go on to screen sharing there. All right, so thanks for that welcome. Just quickly, for those that weren't here last week, starting with some stuff about me. So I am the CEO of a company called Eucalyptus. We have pilot.com.au, Kin Fertility and Software Skin. Basically, we're a telehealth platform that builds brands on top of that. Before that, I was head of marketing at Koala, and I do some advisory work. I've worked with Canva, Pizza Hut, Neura, and a whole lot of other businesses. Basically, on building digital infrastructure and hoping to grow digital businesses. So hopefully, that's what we can talk about today. I think the starting point for me whenever I try and talk about this stuff is just how much more complex and difficult being successful online has become. So the evolution over the last 5 years of digital marketing channels has meant that it's never been easier to launch stuff online. So you've got, Shopify for e-commerce, Substack for newsletters, Klaviyo for emails, Facebook ads, Google ads. It's never been more accessible, but standing out has never been more difficult. And so the way that I like to talk through presentations like this is I like to make sure that we are like talking about the hygiene, so things that are like essential, you can't get started without. Then like trying to talk through some must-haves and best practices amongst those must-haves, and then areas for differentiation and how we can essentially use tactics that are capable of driving kind of like asymmetric growth for the business in crowded spaces. So firstly, I just want to like quickly touch on hygiene because we don't have a huge amount of time, but there are things which absolutely have to be set up. So firstly, making sure you have Google Analytics set up properly. So making sure that you have, I think the basic things are having the pixel set up correctly, which you can just Google any Google Analytics kind of course and we'll show you how to do. The second thing is having UTM tracking, which is post URL tracking on all of your links so that you can see where your traffic is coming from. And the third thing is having goals so you can track events. So basically, like if that's new to any of you, then just Google Google Analytics setup, and they have a whole lot of good stuff on there to make sure you can do that. The next thing is your Google business listings. So can't get started without those. So make sure they're set up properly. Organic social accounts, and then brand keywords. So basically, making sure that you have just like the basics to get going. And if once you've got that, then it's a lot easier to kind of move beyond that. So then to dive into like the must-haves, and I think here is where a lot of businesses have some basic version of this kind of stuff set up, but it's not optimized and it's not well done. And so therefore they give up a whole lot of opportunity and struggle to really get moving because they have what is like kind of essentially thought of as like a leaky funnel where they're doing great work to drive traffic, or they've got a great website, but somewhere in the process, things break down. And if they break down, then you end up spending money and getting nowhere. And I know that's a pain point that a lot of people I speak to talk about. So what we're going to go through there is some things on email capture, on the importance of a welcome flow and like well-structured emails, on some like quick tips for like social media, advertising, prospecting and content, and then how to set up retargeting campaigns. And then we'll dive into like areas of differentiation and how some of the brands that I've worked with have been able to kind of have huge amounts of growth from relatively simple tactics that I hope kind of can be replicated. And what we'll talk about there is like the importance of creative, mispriced media and how to find it, and then kind of complex CRM management and how you can take advantage of customers that are already in your database in some form. So the first thing here is just talking about the importance of email capture. So it's pretty standard practice now for businesses to have some form of like pop-up or slide-in bar or something that attempts to capture email. And I think the important thing here is that like it's done well. And what I've shown you there is the Culture Kings example. So very, very successful multi-$100 million e-commerce retailer based out of the Gold Coast. And so what I really like about this email capture is it kind of pops up on 10 seconds. So it's relatively quick to pop up. It's a bit intrusive, but it kind of does the job because what they're doing is they understand kind of the value exchange that's taking place between them and the customer. So you can see they're talking about the latest releases and exclusive deals. So Culture Kings is a business that is driven hugely by exclusive drops. And so they've put that front and center of the email capture. They've made it relatively simple to sign up, email address, birthday, and gender. And then they've given you multiple options. So they've gone, you can sign up with email or you can sign up in Messenger. And that then serves to capture a whole lot of data for them, which then feeds into their CRM program, which is one of the best running around. And so if you're a business that has a large number of SKUs and regular releases or regular kind of exchange, like, so I heard about the ballet example there. So CRM is incredibly important if you're running an event-based business, because your ability to sell regularly is going to define how well you do. It's not about one transaction, it's about maintaining multiple transactions. And so making sure that you have some value exchange up front, understanding what content you can provide to people online or in a simple way, or whether it's discounts or exclusives or whatever it might be, and then setting that up well. The next thing is the importance of the welcome flow. So this is one that absolutely kills me when it's not set up properly. So basically, once you get that email capture the first time, it's really important that your next 7 to 10 days of email are well structured and well optimized. So the example I've actually got there on the right is from our business pilot, which is It's an email it's the second day email after people sign up. So the things that you need to do, make sure you're doing is delivering the value that you promised straight away. So if you're promising an exclusive drop, if you're promising exclusive content, make sure they're delivered within minutes of people signing up. If you're doing a discount, same thing. So then 24 hours later, you have like the sell the dream email, which is basically your website translated into simplified text form. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side of this slide here is us attempting to sell people on one of our products, and it's a detailed text-based email that goes through our whole proposition in a narrative form. Then 24 hours after that, you have the social proof email. So one of the most important emails in a flow is the combination of reviews and PR. So what you're trying to do there is show to people that are prospective customers that you're legitimate, that there's something to be excited about, and that other people have made the purchase. You then want to wait somewhere around 2 days for like what we call the blockers email. So basically how that works is you write down a list of things that are potentially blockers for people purchasing. So whether that's price, whether that's delivery, like it's almost like an FAQs email, but focused on things that might be hurdles to purchase. Then you have 2 days later, you have the feedback email, which is one that says, hey, is there anything we can do to help you make your decision? And it's like trying to open up a dialogue with the customer. And then the last one, which we kind of think of as a recovery email, is you improve the discount and attempt to do it that way through something that like is essentially there to close them. And the reason that we do all this in such intensity is because we found that like basically you have 7 to 10 days with people while they're highly engaged, and then their email open rates will drop off drastically from there. So make sure you have this set up. Like the temptation is to think that you're over emailing here, but in most cases, people will have high engagement early on and then fall away. And so having that email just sitting on your list as a vanity metric is going to not be particularly useful, and you need to kind of strike early while you can in most cases. Okay, so once you've got your email, your sign up and your welcome flow done, we can start to talk about social media advertising, kind of generally the principles of prospecting for customers. And I saw a lot of the questions in the flow, a lot of questions in the Q&A were about how to like extend your reach and kind of target customers across like the major social media networks. And I think one of the points I'd like to kind of make as a start off here is that like it's actually really important when you're starting out in particular to kind of focus. So what I see a lot of is people trying to run 10 or 20 different channels as small businesses. And the reality is what happens there is you end up in a situation where you have a lot of media being done badly. And so at this point, what we see is that like if you are running across Facebook and Instagram, which is all bought through one platform, and then potentially like the Google universe as well, which is display, YouTube, and search, you're actually covering the majority of the advertising market. So don't think that you need to be chasing kind of fads in new channels when they become hype. So like, for instance, the example that a lot of people always talk about is like, oh, should we be doing TikTok? And it's like, until you have funnels working properly on Facebook and Instagram, and then potentially YouTube and display, there's very little reason to expand outside of those channels. So let's talk about what it actually takes to get to the point of effectiveness on these channels. And I think one of the great myths that is out there in the world with regards to Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube is that account complexity is really important. And it's driven by this generation of kind of people that are selling services like buying media in these channels where complexity suits their ends, which is like, I have a secret, therefore you have to pay me extra money to set up your Facebook account. And the reality is for Google and Facebook, the last 5 years have been about constant simplification using machine learning. So they've taken a lot of the complexity out of the buying process so that people can essentially get as close to plug and play as possible. And so I guess like the example that I have there is, so you can see a campaign structure that we have for our new skincare brand. And it's quite literally one campaign. And that campaign has spent, tens of thousands of dollars, but we have kept it super simple so that we can try a whole lot of different creative. Because what Facebook and Google have both done is they've made it easier and easier to target audiences and then more and more difficult to win on creative. So that's the game we have to play here. So some points. So a lot of small businesses and new businesses as well over-service their organic channels. So I think there's a stat out of Facebook, which is that somewhere between 5 and 10% of your audience will see anything you post organically. So let's like run some simple maths on that and say we have an Instagram page with 10,000 followers. Every time we post, somewhere around 500 of those followers are seeing that post. The cost of 1,000 views on Instagram kind of fluctuates between $10 and $15. So the cost of 500 views, which you're getting on an organic social post, is approximately $7. So the imperative to advertise rather than post organically is very, very strong. And I see a lot of businesses make the mistake of doing that the wrong way. The next thing is about optimization. So another thing that people, it's like often very tempting to optimize for things like traffic or reach, because the logic being that the more people that see your ads, the better you'll do. And the reality is that actually is being proven again and again on the internet to be a flawed tactic, because there is so much fraud. So there is so much disengaged traffic and cheap traffic and bot traffic that really the only successful campaign infrastructures that have shown to stand the test of time for most businesses are ones that are optimized for conversions. And so, sorry if this is known, but I think the 2 conversion events that are really important to set up are using the Facebook pixel. For those that haven't done it, Google how to set up the Facebook pixel. It's relatively simple. They make it pretty easy to do, but you want something that is a lead event. So for e-commerce businesses, that might be an add to cart. For service businesses, that might be an email sign up. For event businesses, it might be some kind of like RSVP. So you want an event that looks like that, and then you want an event that is a purchase event. And you want to have both of those things set up. And basically the rule is if you're getting more than 20 to 30 people hitting that event a day, that's enough to optimize based on that event. Then the other thing, really important thing, is that if you have a large SKU mix, setting up a product feed, again, that's something that Facebook and Google both use to allow ads to be served to the most relevant people so that you don't have to control the creative all of the time. Really, really powerful thing. Make sure you have it set up. And then the last thing is lookalike audiences. So most businesses have built up some database in the vicinity of 1,000 people at least over the course of their lives. If you don't, then you can focus on building that up as one of the early things you do. But once you have that 1,000 people, forming lookalike audiences by feeding that information back into Facebook is a must-have, and one of the best ways to grow your audience quickly using Facebook's power to find people that look like your customers. Cool. So just another thing there is, so that account simplicity there. The next thing is like what we really prioritize across Eucalyptus and did across Koala is heaps and heaps of testing. So what you can see here is us trying to figure out ways to make our skincare brand work. And so we have a lot of different audiences, a lot of different creative angles. We'll set them up as ad sets. We'll give them kind of $50 to $100 to see how they go originally, and then quickly kill things that don't work and scale up things that do. And so basically the point I'm trying to make on this one is that the downside of trying something is really low. So the more things that you try, the more likely you are to have ones that really are breakout successes. And I want to show you an example here. So this one on the right here, which is the picture of the dog, I hated this ad when our team launched it. I was like, this is the stupidest piece of advertising of all time, and it's going to do terribly. But as I kind of watched it perform, it drove probably 5 to 10 times as many conversions as a standard ad for us for a price 1/3 of the usual price. And so I guess the point I want you guys to take from this is that creative is an incredibly powerful part of the engine, and that creative doesn't have to be good. It in fact just has to be contextually relevant. Again and again in the social media channels, we've seen across brands that I've worked on that the rewards for production that feels authentic, simple, and kind of clearly communicated hugely outstrip the rewards for highly produced pieces of content. And I have an example that I want to show you guys for this, which is, so Neura Headphones, it's a personalized headphone company for those that don't know it. You do a sound test and then it adjusts the sound levels for your hearing and helps you get a really personalized sound experience. So they had a huge amount of success on Kickstarter and used the Kickstarter to make money to make this campaign.
Hello, Sam.
So a very highly produced, very high quality video that unfortunately drove almost no sales for the business. And that's because it's not the kind of content that you see effectively perform on Facebook. So interestingly, as a B-side to that, they shot this campaign.
Yeah, very comfortable.
Oh, it feels nice.
Okay, and so now I press this. Wow. Whoa. Holy shit.
Oh, fuck. That is huge.
So what you're seeing there is like something that feels a lot more authentic, something that performs earlier in the video that clearly articulates the product proposition and that uses product shots from the beginning. And the difference between these two campaigns was the campaign on the right has driven something like $5 to $10 million of revenue for the business, whereas the number one on the left is less than 100th of that. And so I guess like the takeaway here, and like this takeaway is there again and again and again, is like authenticity, quality, simplicity, and then speed and product shots are what you need to do on social media. And I think the point that I think articulates this well is I think the average watch time on a Facebook video is somewhere between 6 and 9 seconds. Which is ridiculous. Like I think it's a sign that the platform is actually gaming some of the attention, but it means that you really have to have high impact in the first 3 to 4 seconds. And so the way that we think about that, and if you historically think about that across our brands, is what you're looking to do is create a hook that gathers attention in the first 1 to 3 seconds. So something that breaks the pattern of scroll. So you're going like, how can I hold someone's attention really quickly in a way that is going to hold them through to me explaining the product? So I like we have a saying internally, which is kind of like attention is the only currency in the first 5 seconds of a video. Once you win that attention, then your opportunity to explain what you do in a nuanced way goes up hugely. But if you don't win that attention in the first place through some kind of catch that feels authentic, that captures the eye, then you're always going to be fighting an uphill battle to make things effective. Okay, on to the next thing. So I guess the next point I wanted to make is like that unfortunately, all of the things I've mentioned already so far today are like largely table stakes now in the world of online business. If you don't have these things, then it's going to be very hard to get going, but these things, effectively driving these things alone isn't going to be enough to launch your business out of like standard performance and into something that does way better. And so I guess the areas that I want to talk about are like how you expose yourself to small bets and small risks that can deliver asymmetric upside. And the way that I think about that is like the way that information now spreads on the internet is that if you get something that goes really well, it can spread to 100 or thousands of times the level of performance that you get out of standard pieces of media and standard pieces of creative. And I have a couple of examples here to show you. So the one on the right, I don't know who that is, but I think it's one of the like celebrity women, but it's like, oh shit. Sorry again. So I think what the thing about that is so this is an example of a Sydney-based sunglasses brand that was able to use gifting really well to drive performance. So I think basically their influencer strategy was to gift the product to as many celebrities as possible. And like, 90% of the celebrities, it never sees them, they never touch it. But in this case, one huge star was able to was posted with the sunglasses on, and it drove a huge performance growth for the business. There's a couple of Koala related examples there. The first one being the celebrity partnership with Steve Smith. So he was an early investor in the business. And then we were able to get the sticker on his bat for the time that he played over the last few years. And I think the thing that made that partnership really work was that it was about the length and authenticity of the partnership. So it wasn't like a one-off shot in the dark celebrity campaign. It was like somewhere there was an alignment of values that lasted multiple years. And that was able to drive a lot of success for the business. The second one is the billboard example. So the story there is that people will often say to me things like, oh, Koala's does a whole lot of really good outdoor advertising. And I mean, the reality is Koala does barely any outdoor advertising. It just does individual pieces of content that it perceives to be high impact. So it shops around for billboards that it believes where it can do something creatively that will stand and spread online. So for example, that billboard there, that's next to the IKEA at Tempe. So we put the first one up, which is the top one, cost something around $5,000 to do. It did quite well online. So we bought the bottom one and wrote the apology. And that drove something I think 2,000 or 3,000 mattress sales over the course of a few months. And it's an example of a relatively small bet in the sense that it cost only $5,000 or maybe $10,000 total across multiple months with huge upside when it pays off. And I think that is something where Koala and other businesses in similar situations, it's about being able to take a number of small bets. So the ones that work pay off hugely and the ones that don't, you're able to kill off. And there are other examples of that. So I think differentiated SEO is an interesting one. So there's some great businesses in Australia, Canva being one of them, but Finder being another one where because they control a whole lot of demand around small endpoints, they're able to generate a whole lot of landing pages, and those landing pages drive a whole lot of conversions for the business across a very, very long tail. And I think one of the other ones that people ask a lot about here is YouTube channels and podcasts. And I think it's really tempting to think that all businesses can launch YouTube channels and podcasts and be effective. I think the challenge with both of those things is creating something differentiated. So you really have to serve a really specific niche really well in order to create a YouTube channel or podcast that works. So if you believe that you have a narrow niche that is underserved from a content perspective that can spread across a whole range of geographies, then I think that's a really powerful thing to do. So examples are newsletters, kind of YouTube channels that do things like cooking, and then also podcasts that service niche audiences. But I guess the point there is it's a long game. It's a real slog, and you have to be producing content extremely regularly in order to succeed. So I think when I try and think about driving really fast growth with these things, I'm where can we take small bets where the audience is cheap, where the opportunity for performance and growth is outsized. So can we find media that's mispriced that has the opportunity to spread? Can we find celebrity partnerships or people with large audiences that might want to become ambassadors for us? Or do we have an opportunity where creative can really stand out in order to, so the example that I often talk about on the other side of the creative standout point is, so there's a whole lot of advertising inventory in building elevators across Sydney, for example. But it's mostly taken up by software products, and it's relatively cheap. But when you stitch them all together, there are millions of people who see that inventory. So at Koala, we were well, maybe we can make really interesting creative by building, and that will create a different experience for the people seeing that advertising. And so we made building specific creative. We then kind of spoke to the people in the buildings about whether they'd seen the ads, and we saw a huge uplift in awareness for Koala because we did something different in the channel. So I guess with the speed that tactics now evolve in digital media channels, there aren't a set of golden things that are going to work for you. It's about having your hygiene set up properly. It's about having your core channels set up in the right way with a high speed of creative velocity through those channels. And then it's about trying to expose yourself to asymmetric upside where you can do something differentiated that has the opportunity to spread. And if you can kind of nail those things, I think that's the best platform for growth in a time when it's often quite difficult and digital media can be quite competitive. Rebekah?
Hey, thank you, Tim. That was incredibly insightful and an incredible amount of information to take in. I want to say, wow, we've got an incredible number of people on this webinar. Our vision for this series is to include the community as much as possible. And just so you're aware, we have 400 Sydney business owners joining us today on this webinar. And thank you, Tim, for being so willing to share your insights with all of us. Our idea for bringing the community together is to bring in case studies. So we have brought in 3 different Sydney businesses today to share a little of their story, how they've approached change since COVID, and they've got some questions for Tim. We're going to go through this quite succinctly, so we have a chance to also address questions from all of you. So if you have a question for Tim, please do put it in the Q&A, and please upvote the questions that you would like addressed. We've had questions coming, are we videoing this? Yes, we are, and we will send you a link to the video in the next webinar. And I'm also going to share now in chat a link to the video of Tim's last program in case you missed it. And we've also written up a takeout sheet to give you a kind of a summary of notes that we took from last week's webinar. So that will be coming up in the chat now. I want to introduce first Chris from the Whiskey List. So we have Chris from the Whiskey List, Nina from Courtesy of the Artist, and Andy and Sean from Cooey Snacks. They have questions about how to expand their audience from niche to a more mainstream audience. We have questions about how to increase sales on Amazon, how to use influencer marketing, how to increase social media presence, how to get more US sales. These are the questions that are going to be coming from our case studies today. And then straight after this, we will be answering some of your questions as well. So please keep those questions coming. I'm going to hand to Chris, who is in Newtown, I think, today. And he's going to share a little bit about what the Whiskey List is and what you would like to ask Tim.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Appreciate being able to be here. And that was good stuff, Tim. Thanks for all that. So the Whiskey List we launched in 2018. We've been bootstrapped since then. And our whole goal is to become Australia's online home for the whiskey consumer as well as other spirits, because there's quite a crossover there. We're focusing more on the premium range. So it's about $100 to $200 a bottle. If you're thinking in terms of wine, that's probably 30 to 50 bucks for a bottle of wine. So it's a similar type of consumer there. At the moment, we've gotten our a B2C marketplace up and running as sort of our core offering to consumers. So we now actually can say we have the widest range available for sale in Australia, and which is very cool because we know this because we're actually monitoring all other websites as well that are prominent in the space. Our premium differentiator that we're going for is the most personalized experience that we can offer, eventually both in terms of the UX, but for starters, in terms of the products that we put in front of people. So similar kind of to a wine gallery, good pair days type of experience, but quite a bit more data driven on top of just the general sort of easy way of finding a recommendation for someone. A bit of context about a year. We accelerated our marketplace launch because of COVID, because quite obviously that was a massive opportunity for us, and that has turned out well. And at the same time, we had been working with a local events provider who has events that used to run over a weekend, and they would have about 1,500 people come through, basically like a whiskey exhibition show. We were helping them digitize some of their experiences, and then we sort of merged for 2020 and took their virtual experiences completely online. So we ran, I believe, around 8 events, which equated to between 100 and 400 people per event. And we delivered around 44,000 sample bottles of different whiskey throughout the entire year. That's been really, really good. And sort of where that kind of brings us to now is we've got a user base of around 15,000 monthly, similar amount of subscribers. Logged in members is around 4,000. And we're at the point where we've done a decent job at getting our growth with organic channels and sort of just the product itself, being able to gather people who are already interested. Our next step in our real growth phase is how do we reach the people who aren't out there actively looking for a place to find what they're looking for, but are more the general consumer who's going to be rocking up to Dan Murphy's and just picking up something off the shelf vendors. I realize it's sort of quite a generic one, and I think a lot of the stuff you've covered is definitely going to be helpful, but hopefully pulling out some stuff that might be specific for us in this scenario.
Yeah, I think so. I think the Good Pair Days example is an interesting one because I know that business really well. And I think the shift from educated niche to like uneducated mass is actually about lowering the cost of trial and lowering the barrier to education. So basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that your first steps into your brand from an uneducated user perspective are high value with regards to information, so that they feel like driving, like the shift from like I know nothing to I know something to I'm going to trial is as quick as possible. What I'd be thinking about is making sure that your email funnels initially contain a hook, which is like, here's how you go from zero, I like whiskey, but I know nothing, through to I'm ready to trial. So really focus on that experience and try and deliver value through, it sounds like you have a really interesting content model. Deliver that value as quickly as you can and in an automated way as you can to that person, so that they feel like they're on a journey. And once they feel like they've taken those first few steps on the journey, then I think your drive to then purchase will be relatively simple.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. So one of the ideas we actually had is like a very, very low cost, basically sample set. So it's a bit like Whiskey Loot, but we would be using that as an intro funnel. So we're going to send you 5 whiskeys that are our best whiskeys for $100. We're going to send you samples, you rate them, and then we'll come back at you with a recommendation for what you should try next. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. And I think the big piece that ties into that is, can you build education around those products that you send out as trial? I think there's a lot of businesses sending out trial packs, but your differentiator is like, hey, here's how you can learn while you trial. And if people get sticky on that, I think you'll hold them forever.
Yeah, okay, cool. That's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tim. I'm going to hand now to Nina of Courtesy of the Artist. So Nina is going to describe a little about your business. Many of you will know Nina and Courtesy of the Artist in the Strand Arcade. Subsequently, you've moved online thanks to COVID, and have questions around increasing your social media presence and also making sales in the US. Over to you, Nina.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Tim. This has been great. So, look, we're a retailer. We specialise in contemporary jewellery, and we represent all different artist kinds of pieces. So they are quite unique. Each piece is unique. So a lot of them aren't kind of repeatable. So with COVID, I mean, we also have, we're quite an experiential kind of based business as well. So we've got a large exhibition platform where we showcase works as well there. And that helps us drive sales. That helps us sell and educate kind of our audience. So with COVID, we had to close all that down. So we did run a virtual exhibition where, because this exhibition was all about not only seeing these beautiful pieces, but it was about the photography as well, so that people could actually, really understand what the pieces look like, as well as smell something, as well as taste something, as well as kind of be part of this kind of, these pieces aren't just kind of normal jewellery pieces, so they've all got all these stories attached to them as well. So it's all about, for us, it's about knowing how to do that really kind of a lot more effectively. I mean, we've done it quite lo-fi, but even looking at just listening to what you were saying too, understanding that it doesn't need to be these high production kind of videos in order to sell these pieces, but our pieces are quite high end pieces. So it's about how do we do that more effectively, as well as kind of hit that US market a little bit better, what we're doing.
So a couple of things that I know like vaguely about the, like, let's call it like the like luxury, but also kind of like the art world generally, is that I think when you're shifting to an online model, I think it's really, as you said, it's really hard to get the production standards to the quality that you would have in the gallery experience. And so you have this issue where it's like, how do I shift, how do I create that experience online when I don't have like endless production resources? And what I've seen work quite well is essentially people using like some high funnel event, like a sign up or like a statement of interest in the product. And then you doing like more of a kind of like consultation style piece. If like, I don't know if this works from a unit economics perspective, but like, so you say, hey, like, are you sign up in saying like me talk you through the piece and explain it to you in person over a Zoom? Whereas like that, so that authenticity and real world, like kind of retail style experience, if it makes sense for you from a like cost perspective, can really be a big difference. So you want to like essentially set up an advertising structure which drives people to sign up for like a tour if they want to do something like a bit more detailed, and then use that as the mechanism to sell, so that you don't have to go about making like hugely complex campaign infrastructure or production standard stuff. So like basically use like a really wide funnel to begin with. And I think part of the question was about the US. So set a structure which is like, hey, this is like all of this incredible limited edition, beautiful stuff. And then cast really wide with that net, and then try and push people to a statement of intent, which is like a sign up for something or like a booking for something, and then use a bit more of a personal level experience beyond that to drive people through to conversion. And again, like I don't know enough about like the unit economics of the business and the margins and stuff, and if that makes sense. But to me, like it's very hard to go mass luxury. It's almost impossible, actually.
Absolutely.
Very few companies do it, right? So what you need to do is drive to something where you can control it and like deliver a really high quality experience. And so I think you need to filter into that and then use that as the way that you sell.
That does make sense.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nina.
Great. Thanks, Nina. Thanks, Tim. And finally, for our case studies, I'm going to hand over to Sean and then Andy from Kui Snacks. You guys have questions specifically about hiring a growth marketer, what to look for. We're also going to talk about influencer marketing and about how to increase sales on Amazon, amongst other things. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks, Tim. That was brilliant. And I love the Doge example as well. We, Kui Snacks, me and Andy co-founded Kui 6 years ago now. And we make a range of healthy meat snacks like beef jerky, chicken jerky, and these healthy new Twiggy sticks. It started when we were living in when I was living in Bondi and looking for healthy snacks at work, and then came across this beef jerky you could get in the US, but because you couldn't import it here, I bought a dehydrator naturally and started making it out of my little apartment. And then it was a year later when I was living in New York, and I was running around Central Park with Andy. And he asked what I was doing with my life, and I said I'd been working on a beef jerky startup. We ran in silence for a little while longer, and then I tried to convince him that I wanted to start it in Australia. And eventually he was convinced. We bought a factory in Tasmania, and we started making the snacks. We've been predominantly a retail business. We started selling out of the farmers markets and then got into stores. So we're in about 900 locations currently, like Woolworths and Dan Murphy's and so forth. But we just haven't felt like we've cracked digital, and especially given the last year, we think we can do a lot more there. And I was really, and as Andy will ask soon, but really resonated the whole thing about creative, because I feel like that's something we've relied on like other people to create for us, like influencers and stuff, and we haven't really been controlling that ourselves. But Andy, do you want to ask your first question?
Sure. Hi, Tim. My question's around personnel and how to execute on this stuff. Sean is always on the phone to Woolworths. I'm literally running a sausage factory in Tasmania. We don't have a lot of spare time. Yeah. One option that's open to us is actually learning how to do this ourselves and keeping it in-house. But there's, of course, competing priorities. Historically, we've hired contractors, and we're discovering that the only thing that's more expensive than a professional is some of these amateurs that we let play around with our website. So we're sort of at a loose end on how to do this. Do we try to do it ourselves, or if not, how do we identify the right people to work with? And I'd appreciate any tips on how to set up that relationship so it's a mutual benefit.
It's an incredibly difficult question, right? Because you have freelancers where there's no filter system, and that means that you end up paying for 3 bad ones for every good one you get. You have agencies where there's a significant kind of retainer cost over the top of the actual creative, and then you have like kind of large partners or doing it yourself even, where you're not sure if you're actually getting the time to actually do it. So my view is that the lowest bar thing that you can do is young creatives like designers and video people, because inevitably coming out of university, they're incredibly cheap, right? So they graduate, they have little experience, but they have an understanding of how the internet works, right? So what you're essentially trying to do is create creative that works on the internet. And so I think the first hire in a lot of these cases should be someone that's just a young designer / video person who can increase your volume of output. And then on the media side of things, my view tends to be pay a freelancer to set up your accounts and then take them over straight away. Because a lot of the mistakes you'll make in the setup, but once the setup's done correctly and you have good creative volume, it's very hard to mess up from there.
Great. Thank you.
If we have time, Rebekah, I'll ask my two other questions. Secondly, just about Amazon. We sell on Amazon, but as you know, Amazon sort of standardizes all products and it's hard to cut through. How would you recommend standing out and then increasing sales? We do some advertising, but I just feel like there's a bigger opportunity there to...
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one, right? Like, I don't think... So, there's a huge SEO game to play on Amazon. And if you want to play that game, you can, and it takes a long time. And there's enough resources out there without me kind of going into detail about how that works. But I think the real tough thing is driving sales in an environment that you control as best you can. So I think like pushing advertising content that pushes to Amazon, like you end up essentially paying on both sides. And so like we've had this difficult decision in a number of businesses that I've worked with where it's like, well, is this actually really worth it to be here? Or should we be like pushing to a Shopify store and trying to control more of the experience? And so I think you either like nail the SEO game on Amazon and like say we're going to commit to this for a year, or you go, well, actually we're going to control as much of our experience as possible and deliver on Shopify. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Finally, just wanted to ask, and you sort of touched on this before, but we do currently some influencer marketing, but just target those micro influencers that actually respond, and we send them product, and we don't really have the funds to get sponsored posts and so forth. Do you think you mentioned brand ambassadors and celebrity ambassadors, is that a better way to play, or is it better to, at this stage of our business, to just keep on giving free product to small micro influencers? Yeah, so Sean, I think like I'd imagine when you hear someone like me speak, you hear a lot of stuff that you're like, yeah, that's all very well and good. There's probably $400+ of margin in your product. And so it's like, there's a world where it's like we sell CPG stuff. And so a lot of our margin is going to Woolies. We have a little bit of like delivery is really expensive. We can't run these big campaigns. And I think my experience with businesses like yours is that like gifting is almost the only way to scale an influencer strategy. So you either do it, I think there's an opportunity to do both. There's like potentially like equity partnerships with the big influencers where you go like, actually you can have a long-term stake in the business. And then there's bottom-up gifting, and then you're kind of trying to find the happy medium between those two. No, that's great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Sean.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Tim, and thanks to all the case studies. As I mentioned before, we are looking to bring in as many case studies and as many members of our community as we can to these events. So if you would like to be a case study in a future event, please do message the City of Sydney email, which you will find on the Eventbrite emails that you would have received from them about this and about future events. So we're going to go to questions now. Please ask questions. Please also upvote the questions that you would like answered, because we're probably not going to get through all of them. There are a lot of questions. I'm going to start with about the funnel. If you could describe your funnel in a little bit more depth. I know that there's a Koala massive spreadsheet that has how you measure everything. There's a question around how often you change your Facebook campaigns. What's the minimum kind of sample size of impressions that you need to do an A/B test? So if you could just dig a little into that funnel, Facebook advertising funnel, for a couple of minutes, that would be awesome.
Okay, so I feel like the question here is the constant, like, should we move stuff out of the learning phase, do Facebook best practices style stuff, or should we be prioritizing Facebook campaign testing? And so one thing that, like, this is a problem that at scale campaign companies have. So basically the way that we do it is we will have a test campaign, which is a ad set optimized, high volume testing campaign where we'll have like 30 to 50 tests going at any given time in that one campaign, and it'll never reach the end of the learning phase. And then the advertising creative that performs within that campaign environment goes into the scale campaigns, and we never touch the scale campaigns. So basically there'll be a campaign that is like, has been running for a year or more, which is just, hey, this is all of our best performing advertising and our best performing audiences, and we only ever update it to add new creatives to it and occasionally turn ones off. But we go for stability in that one and then volatility in our testing campaign. And if you're not a Facebook expert, that's going to be a bit confusing, but hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you, Tim. Another has had lots of votes. Taking the example of the dog creative that you didn't like, but it performed well. The question is around your brand and people's perception of your brand if you're putting out something that seems kind of low quality. Can you address that?
Yeah, I think, like, look, my view is the internet is all about context, and brand integrity loses out to attention in almost every situation in an internet, in a social media environment. Like I would never run that as a TV ad, no way, or even a radio ad. But in an environment where content is social and created by people, then I think being contextually relevant performs 10 to 100 times better than being of brand standards. And so therefore, like my view is that people understand context and will appreciate the fact that you're like playing in a social media channel, and then you can professionalize on your website. So we deliver, like we're a medical company, right? We shouldn't be running, like under that auspice, we shouldn't be running like Doge memes. But our view is that once people get to our website, we can hold their attention and build education and detail there. But in the media channels, our job is to win that attention.
Cool. Thank you, Tim. There's another question around mispriced media. So you mentioned before that there is a whole lot of media out there. You used the lift example that you found at Koala. Where do you find mispriced or underused media?
Okay, so my view is cast a very wide net. So there is no shortage of media salespeople willing to give you pricing. I think there's a couple of them on this call, judging by the text messages I'm receiving. But so there's no shortage of pricing. There's no shortage of pricing, right? So get as much as you can, and then apply the lens. Does my product over-index in this audience? And do I feel like I can do something creatively that engages at a higher level than that media has historically been priced at? So an example, Koala sponsors East Dolphins Cricket Club. The logic there was that there's 600 juniors in that club. Every weekend they're walking around Bondi Junction, Bondi, like some of the more affluent areas of Sydney. They're tiny walking billboards as children. And so therefore, like the CPMs on that sponsorship is incredible. And so I think like out of the box thinking that prices the assets and then prices the creative over the top of that, cast over a wide net can be hugely effective. And that sounds like I made that sound worse than it is. We also like supporting junior sport, you know.
I also know the story about Koala and the Channel 9 infomercials that you do, all the infomercial stories for Koala have been huge. Like that's another example. And also radio. Can you talk to a little about TV and radio and where there might be some unused
I think like a lot of TV and radio advertising is like focused around like the premium peak stuff, and that's where big brands tend to play. But there's the big long tail of interesting stuff that you can do where audiences are different and they're looking at different things, and you can take relatively small bets in things like daytime TV, things like off-peak radio, and you can, like for instance, I think like a radio spot between midnight and 5 a.m. costs like $50, sub $50. So you may not get a big audience there, but if you think you're over-indexed in that audience, then it might be something worth doing. And, you know, those examples are everywhere.
How would you know that's working?
Well, I mean, we have no traffic between midnight and 5 a.m. So it's pretty easy to see if that stuff's working. But like generally you're looking for like some mechanism to set up for conversion tracking. So like, can we, you know, put a link in the email? Can we make a landing page, which is like specific to the type of media, all of that type of stuff. Like it's imperfect, but you're looking for directionally correct feedback.
Okay, cool. I have a couple of questions around the email nurture chain that you mentioned at the beginning. So that's once you have captured someone's email on your list. So question one was around pop-ups. Are pop-ups a good idea? Two is if you can't discount, so if your product isn't able to be discounted, what would you do instead in that email nurture chain? And then what can you give us a little bit more information about what a kind of blocking and unblocking email is?
Yeah, so are pop-ups a good idea? I mean, not like universally. I think the challenge is to make a pop-up that is as unobtrusive as possible. And I think that's by getting the value up and never do any of the UI tricks that are designed to make it difficult for people to exit the pop-up. So pop-ups are fine, make it easy to close them, make them valuable, you should be fine. If you don't have discounting as an option, that's why I actually use that Culture Kings example, because their value proposition is around exclusivity. And so if you can create something gated, like the classic old school email marketing tactic is like ebook content, I think like that is dated, but I think there is always something that you can create exclusive in exchange for value for sign up. And then the blocker email, so we tend to write a list of reasons why someone wouldn't buy the product. So in Pilot's example, it's like price, unsure of efficacy, unsure of the doctors, are uncomfortable buying online, and we break down and structure answers to them individually so that we can like essentially try and stop any of the reasons that people don't want to engage with the platform, and then use that as an email campaign.
Thank you. I have a final question. So there's a question here that's been voted. How do you find young creatives / graduates? I just am asking this one because I know that you did something creative with competition at Koala. And I thought maybe you could just kind of share that idea.
I don't actually think that was me. I think that's probably post my time. But I think like just generally like universities pump out, like UWS and UNSW pump out a whole lot of really talented young creatives. And like what we did historically is we were like, okay, which ones make content online themselves? So can I see ones with like large Instagram followings or like who've made interesting stuff on TikTok, and being like, you clearly understand how the internet works. And if you do that, then transitioning that into a business environment will just be putting metrics around you.
Those last slides. Awesome. Thank you, Tim. I think that is all the questions we have time for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the rest of the questions that people have asked. And if there are ones that seem like they're relevant, then and there are a lot of great questions here, I'm going to include them in the takeout sheet, which we will either email to you and we'll also have live at the next event. So I just wanted to wrap up by thanking Tim, thanking our amazing case studies, thanking the City of Sydney for putting on this series of events. We are going to be sending out a survey that will come from the City of Sydney. It may have already even come to you in your email. It will really help us if you could fill this in. Let us know what you found valuable today, and this will help us know that we're on the right track, and also any ideas for how we might be able to improve the rest of the series. So just so you know what's coming up next. So next week we have Fleur Brown. So she is looking at leveraging your personal brand and rethinking PR in the era of COVID. Fleur is one of the founders of TEDx Sydney and also runs Launch Group, who do PR for a lot of the kind of high growth tech, but also retail businesses. So please register. We'll be sharing the link to register in chat. We're almost at capacity today, so we are going to start hitting capacity on these events. So we would ask you to register early so you can make sure that you're on all of them. The next event after that, so there's 4 more in this first 6-week sprint, all around marketing. So there's Fleur. We then have Andre Eichmeyer, who is the co-founder of Vino Mofo. So Vino Mofo have built a $100 million wine retailer in competition with Woolworths and Coles. So he's going to be talking about brand strategy and how to build a community, particularly, with a lens of, now we have to do things differently in terms of how we build communities. That will be an awesome event. And then we're going to come to, in 3 weeks' time, Chris Wirasina, who is one of the co-founders of Pedestrian TV, who are possibly the most successful content creation business in Australia. Chris is going to be sharing how to create content that cuts through, that it gets shared on social media, that gets people talking about your brand. So please, we've sent the links to all of these events in the chat, or we're putting them up now in the chat. Please register. Please answer our survey and let us know if you found the event. Let us know what you found in the event useful, or any of your ideas for how we can improve. Thank you again to Tim, and we hope to see you the rest of the series, the next 4 weeks, and then we'll have another series the early next year, which is another sprint of 6 events with some amazing leaders from our ecosystem in Sydney, and that's going to be focused on growth strategy, people, and money. So thanks again for joining us today. We had an incredible number of people on the webinar. If you'd like to be a case study, if you'd like us to shout out what your business would like to get or what you're getting out of these events, please email the City of Sydney email address that you're getting all these emails from. And I look forward to seeing you all next Monday. Thanks.